Welcome to Untethering Shame, the podcast where we dig deep into the roots of shame, how it disconnects us from ourselves, and the paths we can take to reclaim our authenticity. Today's guest is someone who has dedicated her life to exploring the complexities of human emotion, particularly one that many of us shy away from: anger. Bronwyn Schweigerdt is a licensed psychotherapist, podcaster, and self-proclaimed anger expert. She hosts the podcast Angry at the Right Things, where she invites listeners to reframe their understanding of anger and use it as a tool for self-awareness and growth. With a master's degree in both counseling psychology and nutrition, Bronwyn brings a unique and holistic perspective to the connection between mind, body, and emotion. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the idea of the core self and what it means to reconnect with your essence. How often anger serves as a defense mechanism and what it can teach us when we approach it with curiosity rather than shame. The disconnection many of us feel between our minds and bodies, and how that disconnection keeps us from fully integrating with our true selves, and practical exercises to bridge that gap, dismantle shame, and allow for deeper emotional integration. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give you a quick heads up. Something new is coming to the podcast starting May 12th. It's called Ask Me Anything, and it's a new segment that'll be here every Monday, where I'll be answering your real questions on shame, boundaries, burnout, and everything in between. So if you've got something on your mind, submit your question using the link in the show notes, anonymous or named, and have your chance to be featured in an upcoming episode. Let's break that silence together. Okay, now with that, let's get cozy and let's dive into today's episode. I noticed that I seem to start every one of my podcast interviews saying, I'm so excited. And it feels very fake. It's not fake, but it feels like it's like this. Here's my line.
Yeah.
But I'm struggling to come up with another word to describe, like, when we met, it was like this magnetic glitter explosion of connection. And so the fact that we're now recording this and I'm just so excited about where we're going to go, not really knowing where we're going to go, I'm so glad that you're here and that we're doing this.
Thank you, Kyira. I hope I live up to that expectation.
Well, know that it's not a projected expectation. It is the feeling I had. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you feel this too, particularly connecting with other practitioners. There's so much beauty in everybody's way of approaching something, but there's times where you meet someone and you're like, gosh, this is the type of person that I feel safe sharing and exploring, but also the type of person I want to witness where they go and explore, and I want to learn, and I want to kind of co-create. And that is just very evident in who you are and how you show up in the world. And so I think you already are living up to that expectation, because I think it's a thing that you cultivate consciously or not, because it sounds like it's important to you to create that openness in the world.
Thank you. I definitely will say I certainly have not always. It's only been pretty recently in my life. I'm 54 now. So yeah, about 50 years of definitely not doing what you're describing. And I feel it. I feel different. I'm 54, but I feel more alive than I ever have. I feel more happy to be alive than I ever have. And there was a time I did not want to be alive, as many of us can relate to. Yeah, it is real. And I am enjoying the fruit of it.
Yeah. One, I think that this sort of beautifully opens the door, because one of the things that you really focus with people on, and in the work that you do, and my guess is in your own journey, is talking about the core self and what that looks like to connect to heal, to embody, all the different words we could use. And so I'm curious, because a lot of us are maybe seeking that next step and we want to do the work. And I think we're sort of inundated, particularly on social media and in sort of general marketing, of like, do this wellness thing, try this book, try this thing, do this one step. And we kind of miss out on what's the actual depth of who we are and the work to be done. And so for people listening, Can you describe what this core self means and why it's such an important thing that we're talking about in the context of our healing and living in an authentic and nurturing way?
Yeah, and I do want to just agree with that. It's easy to kind of be pulled in by things that really are treating symptoms. Those are only going to take us so far, and they're very, very limited. And I'm all about the core, the root, getting to the root, the core where all those symptoms emanate from. And we don't see this in medicine. We see, drugs and surgeries to treat symptoms. And no one asks, well, why are you 25 and have gallstones? No one asks those questions because that gets messy. When we get to the core, we can go to the root. That takes time. That takes work. It takes looking at things. So it's definitely harder. I'm not going to lie in some ways, but man, the payoff is phenomenal. Because like I just said, I feel finally alive and I feel 54 on the outside and the inside. I feel like I'm not a 18-year-old living in a 54-year-old body anymore. Cause I definitely have felt that, but I don't feel 94 living a 54-year-old body. I feel integrated. I feel whole. I feel peace. And those are things I have searched for my whole life. So it's worth going to that core place where that is the root. It's worth that journey. And let's not get sidelined. Let's not get distracted from that. I just want to kind of lead with that. But yeah, our core self is the self we were designed to be. It's the blueprint, I think, of whether you're spiritual or not, however far you want to go with this, but what we were made to be and to fill out, to fill out the potential. We have DNA that we can look at the potential for physiological, but I think we have a DNA for the physical too. That's our potential that we can realize, that we can embody, and that we came into the world with that. But billions of things happen to that to either quash that potential from being realized or kind of subvert it into something else that really isn't us. And we're not being true to ourselves when we live a life. And I don't mean like being fake. I just mean a life where we are not resonating with our true selves. We're not trusting ourselves. We're not being true to ourselves. We are second guessing ourselves. We're betraying ourselves. And ultimately, we are so unsatisfied at the end of the day. That's why we see people who have so much money, but it's not enough. We see beautiful women getting so much work done and it's not enough, or getting thin and they're not thin enough, or, whatever success looks like for us. None of those things are so empty. They're empty. It's like we have all this on the outside, but our core self is just being starved and we feel it and we're never satisfied.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you were describing this, let's not get distracted. It made me think about, I did an equine therapy workshop when I was getting my master's, and we had to do this task where it was me and another clinician. One of us had a short string or like a rope, and the other one had a longer rope. And we were on two sides of a horse. And there was this sort of barricade that we couldn't cross to come in. And we had to basically help the horse get through to the other side without being distracted. And the real connection is this was about addiction and addiction recovery. But it's interesting how I'm seeing a parallel to this of, how do you help get to that point and not get distracted by the shiny things? And I think for us, oftentimes because we're such a doing culture and that success is mostly driven by these metrics of external validation, success, and numbers, it's so easy to get distracted by the shiny object that says, well, you can feel better in 5 minutes, because the idea that the work that we're going to ask you to do is going to take years, and, oh, hey, you're probably not going to feel better. You're going to feel worse right away. And there's also some pain that you're going to get in touch with that's like never going to go away. People are like, fuck that. I don't want that. I want the shiny 5-minute fix. And so there's, I think, a protective instinct to pick that because it feels safer. It feels easier. But then there's also this, if I stop doing, my value goes away. So then I'm healing for what? Because now I've lost everything because I'm not achieving. And so as you describe this, I'm just thinking about the pressure on us. I mean, my daughter's about to be 5, and I already witness how quickly the world works to just get her to do. What's the next step? What's this thing? What's this? Like, there's no time off built in unless you're so intentional from the time that we're kids. And so, it sounds like what you're describing is whether you've gone through complex trauma and you've had these major upheavals, or you've simply tried to live a life in this day and age, you're bombarded with messaging about who you have to be, what you have to do, what's right, what's wrong. And that is confusing. And so then it just, you don't have the time to figure out, well, does this feel right to me? What does this look like? How does this feel? And so it's a slow erosion, it sounds like, of the true self, the authentic self, that potential self, to the self that it feels like we have to be, or just gets conditioned in us to be. And it's not a conscious choice. I'm not like, well, I'm going to perform. It's an unconscious erosion. So then the question of, well, who are you, is like the most overwhelming question for someone because they don't even know anymore.
I think all of that is true, but I think intuitively we do know, like, this is bullshit and there's no quick fix. We do know that, and we feel it. And if we can, kind of get in contact with our intuition, if we can feel that. And that's why, like, I think, with my clients, I'll say things they have never heard before explicitly, but I see this realization dawning on them because implicitly, intuitively, it just feels right what I'm saying. And they're like,
yeah,
because intuitively we all share that. We all know there are these truths, and we feel it in our gut. And so, the more we follow our gut, the more we're in touch with our gut, in touch with ourselves, we can trust that. And that's kind of, we wouldn't talk about shame. That's what shame destroys. That's what shame absolutely destroys.
Well, I think about that. What you're describing too is you can have a knowing or an awareness, but when you've basically severed your head from your body, from your physical self, your emotional self, it's really difficult to figure out how to reconnect to that. So I'm even picturing a client hearing what you're saying, like, well, maybe that feels right, or there's a comfort in that, but I don't quite know why. And I can't yet figure out how to integrate that because they're still so in their head. And so a lot of it sounds like what you're saying is this knowing isn't a part of ourselves that often we kind of disconnect with and cast aside.
Yes.
Why do we do that, do you think? Where does that drive come from?
That's where our core self is. It's not in our head. So I would call the core self our inner child. And, there's a lot of different titles we can use, but the inner child. And when people live they're in their head, they're their adult self. So, and we are completely disassociated. We are disintegrated from our inner child, and we can change that. So we're working in concert with our inner child. We're a team with her. It's not who wins, one wins and one loses. We're a team. We're collaborating. And that is the ultimate goal.
And I can imagine for many of us, the two things that I remember coming up for me when I first started thinking about inner child work in my own healing, because I've always been able to adopt things for clients much more readily than obviously I'm willing to address them for myself. Like I remember getting on the mindfulness and meditation bandwagon for clients real early on, but if I was asked if I did it, it was like, no, I'm good. I don't really need that, And so I do think for me, the inner child resistances that I feel like came up were one, a feeling like I should be fine because I'm not that version of me anymore. I'm not the 8-year-old. I'm not the 12-year-old. I'm not whatever time stamp that is. And so I should be fine. And that's, I think, the adult brain and the shame being like, well, why are you carrying any emotion around these things? Why aren't you fine? Why aren't you okay? Like you're not in a state of threat. You're not in a state, like, look at how good things are. And you sort of gaslight yourself out of feelings.
Yeah.
And then the second part is, I think I was so afraid to go there. I never believed I'd get stuck in an emotion. I think I just didn't want to feel the emotions because I didn't trust how the dominoes would fall or the responsibility that would, I mean, I guess responsibility and empowerment that getting in touch with those emotions would give me. Because if I kept them aside, nothing had to change. And I think I was always afraid that if I went back and got to know that part of me, I'd have to face anger. I'd have to face
Yes.
resentment, pain.
Yes. Yes.
And that would then have to get integrated in how I show up now, in the relationships I never dealt with, in the choices I was making. And that felt really scary to me.
Sure. I think you represent every client I've ever worked with. And yeah, I think those are all, I'm glad you're naming that because that's real.
Yeah.
And I'll have, a client meet with me one session and they're just kind of like, okay, I'm not coming back because I can see them just be like, this is going to change. This is going to have to change.
Yes.
It's scary. But you know what? Rome was not built in one day.
Right.
And we start just connecting to our inner child. And the other thing is like, if we don't, wow, like we are going to lose out because those feelings are there. I believe they're trapped in our body. And if we don't feel those feelings, if we don't connect with them, if we don't allow ourselves to connect with them, feel them and share them with our inner child, because I believe our inner child's feeling them all alone. And the thing with painful feelings is that in isolation, they are intolerable. But what's shareable is bearable. So when we connect with our inner child and say, okay, little Bronwyn, I bet you feel so just disgusted with your mother, but you're not going to feel that alone anymore because I validate your feeling. You have every right to feel that way. I feel it with you. Let's feel it together. You're not going to be alone in that anymore. And our feelings tell us our needs. So when you feel disgust, that's there to give us vital information, what to do next. And we are going to collaborate together, you and me, little Bronwyn, to figure out like what's next. What do we need? We need a hard and fast boundary with this person. Do we need to, have an assertive speech with this person? What do we need to do? So we're missing out on like really coming to life, really, if we avoid that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, again, if we think about the general trend towards having to do more than be, I think there's oftentimes, we just saw this, we're recording this in January. So there's a lot of people that are either in the chaos of the hustle of a New Year's resolution that's likely shame-based, or they are flailing in it and shaming themselves for the shame-based resolution they had. And so there's this jumping into action. I need to fix it. I need to do it. I need to feel better. And often that action is really not guided at the general healing. It's kind of misdirected action. We're doing these things again, sort of treating symptoms, but we're skirting the true pieces that need to happen, as opposed to, it sounds like a lot of what you do with clients is help them build the insight, and you see it. There's sometimes people are ready for that. There's sometimes they're not.
Yes.
And so meeting them where they're at, but helping recognize that the insight is necessary to generate meaningful action that then serves the greater purpose, which is connection to the self, to then get the safety, security, empowerment, all of the things that we're seeking. We're just seeking them in externally validated ways as opposed to that self-rooted way.
Yeah. And we're not trusting ourselves when we do that. And, like you're saying, doing all these things when we commit, we say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. We're trying to prove ourselves at the end of the day. And you can't prove yourself that way, but we can give our core self, our inner child, our approval. And that's what, on my podcast, I lead listeners in exercises that I do with my clients, because I want everyone to be able to do this for themselves. One of those exercises is giving our inner child the approval she's been seeking her whole life. And once we do that for ourselves and we say, little Bronwyn, you won my approval the day you were born, when you were a little blob that could not do anything impressive, and you brought nothing into the world, because what I fell in love with is your heart, what's on the inside. That's what matters. And you cannot lose my approval for the same reason. Nothing can ever jeopardize that. And you've won me. And now, because you have my approval and will never lose it, you are free to disappoint the hell out of everyone else in order to be true to me.
Which is really a shift from conditionally loving ourselves to unconditionally loving ourselves, which for most of us is something we were never taught existed in any real way. Okay. And so I'm thinking about this, and in the context that I want to tie in the anger piece, because it's a big part of what you work on with people. And so is it more so, are we looking at the anger that kind of obscures us from getting to that inner child? Or is it the anger that comes up when we get in touch with the inner child? Or is it both?
I think the shame is what keeps us from getting in touch with the inner child. So let me just give you an example of how I found this out initially. I went for a run one day, and something about going for a run, sometimes I'll have an epiphany. I've heard other people say that too. And I started thinking about my dad. I started thinking about how he shamed the hell out of me as a kid. And I found myself at a stoplight, and I just closed my eyes and I pictured little 10-year-old Bronwyn at the dinner table. And that's when it happened every night, is he would just mock me the whole dinner. And I pictured my adult self entering that memory and saying to little Bronwyn, let's put all this shame in a big cardboard box and return to owner. We're going to give it right back to our father because it belongs to him. It's always been his. It's never been ours. And so I just did that for myself. It was not premeditated whatsoever. And something shifted in me physically and mentally and in every way, spiritually, from that day forward, where I felt like I could trust myself. I was more confident. I felt safer in the world because of that. I felt and in fact, I did have someone try to shame me. And I was just like, oh, yeah, that's funny, because none of that's true. I was able to just sit there, and I had this invisible boundary, force field between me and this person, and that I had never had before. Because in the past, if someone had done the same thing, which they did, I'd just be like, let it on in. Yep, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that's all true, or at least a lot of it. And then I would be holding that shame, and it nearly killed me, actually. It made me very, very depressed. So I felt like a superhero after that. I felt powerful in the best way. Nothing can touch me because I've got me, and I am connected to me now. And it displaced this shame. And I have come to see, with working with my clients, that shame is carried in our gut, which is where our core self lives. That's where our inner child lives. And that shame blocks us. I really believe it blocks us from connecting with our core. And we don't trust our core. And we actually feel like we're living in exile. We're exiled from our core self because of that shame. That's what it does. And that day when I removed it like that, unexpectedly, it was like I came back to me, and I was able to fill out myself in a way. And that's when that all started. And so that's why on my podcast, I lead listeners in a shame exercise where it's just that simple. We give it back to the parent, or it could be a bully that gave it to us.
Well, and I think about it because, the example you gave, and with your dad, it sounds like very overt pain. And so I'm thinking about, for listeners that are like, okay, I can see that. And that makes a lot of sense, or they're picturing maybe a childhood bully, or they're picturing a sibling that was really mean or hurtful. And it was, again, more overt, more aggressive, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
I can also imagine people listening going, but that wasn't what it was like maybe more covert pain.
Yes.
And it feels more convoluted. Well, I think about my mom, but she had trauma and she had pain, and I would played a part of it. And what could I have done differently? And you start to enmesh yourself more. It doesn't not happen in those very overt ways too, because I'm sure you did that. Did I deserve it? What was wrong with me? But I can imagine some resistance to people where they're separating from your example and going, but
Mm-hmm.
mine was different. And so
Yeah.
how would you respond to somebody that says something like that, knowing that there
Mm-hmm.
is this other layer? And yet my guess is your answer is it's still the same goal. It just might
Yeah.
be a slightly different process.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad you brought that up. That's such a good point. So that was kind of the shame for my dad. My mom was what I think most people would connect with when you're bringing this up right now. So I see shame as the residue from
Mm-hmm.
all trauma. And so that includes neglect. And, it's just now, I think that people are really starting to see how traumatic neglect is, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who are older than me are like, oh, that's not trauma. That's just neglect. That's not like I was physically abused. And I'm like, yeah,
Yes.
it's exactly like you were, actually. So with my mom, it was just, she just made no eye contact. Just, it was like I wasn't there,
Mm-hmm.
as a child. Like I didn't exist. She didn't see me. She didn't talk to me. That's neglect. And so that creates shame too. All
Mm-hmm.
abuse, all neglect. And then there's other things where even if a parent is, for the most part, a pretty high functioning parent and a good parent, we derive shame from because we are children. So, for example, this is a very common one. If we're child number one and we're used to having our attachment figure all to ourselves, and let's say
Mm-hmm.
we're 2 years old, and mom has a second baby, and it's like all of a sudden she is consumed with this other baby. She's not doing anything objectively wrong or objectively bad. But for little 2-year-old Bronwyn, I feel like, oh my God, I must really suck, or I've lost her somehow. I
Mm-hmm.
don't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just intuitive. That's how kids, just draw these natural conclusions. Like, I'm bad. I'm shameful. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
important enough, like this sibling. It could be from a look on the parent's face. Let's say I'm playing with bugs as a 3-year-old on the ground, and it could be my mom or my dad just gives me a look of disgust, but I can't distinguish that look of disgust from me playing with bugs from me. So this can happen any which way. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we experienced, capital T trauma necessarily. It just means we experienced something that made us feel shameful, and it sticks. Shame is
Mm-hmm.
sticky. It is
Mm-hmm.
so, so sticky because it lies to us. It says you're defective in some way. There's something inherently wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. When I think about what you just said, that's really key is this idea, I think, of oftentimes when we are older and we go back to do any work on our childhood, we are viewing it from our adult self, not the childhood
Mhm.
self. And so
Yes.
sometimes I think
Yeah.
I would hold myself accountable to things that I can understand now
Mhm.
that an 8-year-old should have never had to understand or
Mhm.
had to deal with or make sense
Mhm.
of. And
Mhm.
also really coming back to our job as children, and obviously different ages are different parts of the development, but our jobs are to develop our sense of self. And we don't
Mhm.
have the ability to understand nuance in that way yet.
Mhm.
And so things are a bit more all or nothing, black or white in our thinking because we're building the basic foundation of the systems to make sense of the world. And so shame, even though you and I can see it as this cancerous
Mhm.
subject in our body,
Yes.
it
Yeah.
really does get developed out of a sense of protection in this way of, well, see, you're
Mhm.
broken, you're defective. Now we know. Now we're going to build our system around this. And it's this way of making sense of
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
But I think one of the things that, and I still struggle with this, I think in this healing process too, is how to make sense of and empathize with someone else's story. So I can understand my mom's complex trauma. I can understand a partner's trauma. I can recognize that they have their own stories while still allowing accountability for what
Yeah.
they did or didn't do and the impact it had on me. And I'm revisiting that now as I go through another layer of healing with my mom. And I said something to my husband the other day. I'm like, now I feel like a shitty daughter. Like as I go back and we're having this healing, granted I'm 37, we've been moving through this for 30 years. There's been this movement on her side, which is beautiful to see. And now I'm immediately shaming myself. And I am immediately discounting all of these other moments and feelings that I had and times that maybe she wasn't there or didn't see me, or I'm pleading with her to do this work, or I'm pleading with her to be sober, or I'm pleading with whatever it was, and being lied to, being dismissed, moving to another home. And I'm having to also remind myself that part of the inner child healing and part of connecting to my core self is not invalidating my past based on changes in my present and the future. And I think that's another part I struggle with. And I'm assuming other people do too, is
Sure.
it's a both and. Those things happened and they were not okay. And I was a child responding the best that I could. And I can reserve the right to allow for change to exist in the relationship if that's healthy and what I want to do. But one doesn't cancel the other one out. And I think I still tend to go to that all or nothing of, well, now maybe I have to forgive everything. And now maybe it's this, and maybe I'm the problem again. And shame finds its way back into the story decades later because of that,
I think what's really behind that shame is it's better for that child to see themselves as the defective one than to admit how angry they are at the parent. I think that is too frightening to say, oh my God, I rely on you. I depend on you and you are failing the hell out of me and I can't trust you. So we turn it in on ourselves. Well, I'm the defective one. I think that's attachment at its core. Attachment theory is like, I'm going to pick myself apart. I'm going to see myself as the problem. To lose this one attachment figure that I have and to see her as who she really is right now, that is too devastating. I can't go there. Yeah.
And because we need to survive. And so the idea is, whether that's the shelter, like actual shelter, or the person that's taking care of us, there's got to be some element of it that feels instinctual or like a survival mechanism, because I can't be angry at her. I can't detach from her. And there's a false sense of responsibility. If I'm angry, then she might leave for good, or this might never get better, or who do I think I am for that? And also mixed with, and I see this a lot now having my own kid, is I really try to model for her that like I fuck up all the time. And adults don't have any right answers. We just have more context to maybe understand the world, and we're doing the best we can too. And so how do you give her the safety to say, gosh, sometimes you're going to call me out. I made the wrong decision, or I wasn't kind, or I screwed up. I missed something. And kind of allowing that, I think for many of us as kids, the message is that, well, the adults know the answers. The adults are right. They're the end all be all. And so there's this idea of that too.
Oh, adults are God.
Yeah.
Adults are God.
Yes. So it's hard to do anything with that. And okay, so we are starting to really unpack some of these pieces of what the core self is, why it's so difficult for us to connect with, and yet we intuitively know that the core self is there. And I think this is where a lot of people are. They are in that sort of feeling, that knowing, and they're either actively working to avoid it because it feels too painful. And, like the client you'll see come in the door and you're like, I can tell they're not going to be back. They're not ready yet for this. Or they're on the opposite side, which is I'm ready to do the work and I've tried all the things and I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. And so I'm curious, as we think about, once we get to that spot, okay, I see this, I hear you, this is here, but I don't know what the fuck to do about it. And if I'm being honest, I'm scared. What is that first step? Is it that return to sender? Is there a different place we start? What do we do to begin the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, the first thing we do is we move toward our inner child. Your relationship with little Kyira is one where you're still like, no, you can't feel that way, or I'm going to second guess your feelings. I don't know if that's valid for you, right? And we will parent our inner child the exact way we were parented by our parent. We will continue that generational cycle with our inner child. Maybe we won't with our physical child, but we will with our inner child. So we need to apologize. We really do. And so that's another, I lead a lot of exercises on my podcast, but that I call it integration exercise, is when I have someone close their eyes and they picture little Kyira, age 5 or whatever, and get down on her level, look her in the eyes and say, I'm so sorry. I am realizing that I've abandoned you. I have absolutely emotionally abandoned you, just like our mother did to us.
Mm-hmm.
I did the same thing. And I have been. And I keep second guessing your feelings. I keep minimizing them. I keep invalidating them. I keep betraying you in relationships. And I am so sorry. I had no idea what it was doing to you. I had no idea how much it caused you to hurt and how much you probably resent me right now. And I am so sorry. I didn't know how powerful I was. I didn't know how much you needed me.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask your forgiveness. And I am going to do the work to attune to you and to make you a priority where your feelings are my priority because they matter to me. And I want to hear all of them. I want you to share them with me, and I will validate every one of them because they are valid. And I want to be the one who meets your needs. And I am going to be that consistent, trustworthy attachment figure that you have been longing for. That's my job. I'm realizing that's my responsibility. And I am going to do whatever it takes as long as it takes to win back your trust in me.
I can imagine people listening right now. There's some people that are like, gosh, I just want to hear that on repeat. And there's some people that are like, I am not touching that with a 10-foot pole because that feels so scary and painful. And so I feel like there's a mixed bag in that. And I could feel both sides coming up for me because I think you got at, when you've used the word integration, like this is an integration exercise. And the idea of an integrated self is past, present, future, head, heart, soul, all of the pieces of the self, and really coming to that place. And I think what you called out that I need to do some radical acceptance around, I think for me is this idea that I am not responsible for, nor could I control how I was parented by other people. I am responsible for and can control how I treated myself and how I decide to move forward with that. And so taking that ownership, and I think it's learning how to take the ownership without adding a new layer of shame. Because I think a lot of the times this part of the process, people will then, I should have known better. I shouldn't have done this. I should have had these things. Why wasn't I kinder? Why didn't I listen? Gosh, now I'm being just like them, like all those stories.
That kind of comes up every single time with people right after they start doing the integration. But I don't think it's shame. I think it's regret. And I'll tell you why. Because shame is in our gut, and they usually feel this in their chest. And this is where we feel anger. And regret is anger with ourselves. It's not shame, but I do lead them, again, in an exercise to forgive themselves. And so we can do that. We can say, you know what, little Bronwyn, I bet you're angry at me. I don't blame you. But I want to I want to remind you that we were conditioned from the day we were born by our parents to, dismiss our own feelings. We were conditioned that we didn't matter, that at the end of the day, what mattered was how other people felt, that we were responsible for other people's feelings. And so we bring in the whole big picture and just say, so little Bronwyn, I'm unlearning those lies now. And I am going to be trustworthy and make you my priority, but please forgive me and take into account that I was brainwashed. I was duped. And I hope you can forgive me for all that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that there is, even as people talk about the difference between guilt and shame and the idea of guilt being more around our behaviors and our actions versus who we are as a person. And I think what you're doing is moving it into that category too. And so it's a way of still providing that unconditional love to ourselves now, who is taking this responsibility and this empowerment on how to move forward, but then also still being able to come back and say, and here's the reality of our story. And so both you as the little self or the inner child, the parts of the self from back then and the self now, all did the best that you could in the context of the life that you had and what you were taught. And so figuring out how to integrate that and to take, again, that ownership, but without it being problematic. And so, okay, you mentioned anger here. And I know that, again, anger can come up in a lot of ways. And so anger towards self is one spot, anger towards our caregivers or any sort of perpetrator or people in our past. Also, I think anger at time and circumstances, and this idea of I should feel better. Again, kind of what I felt as a resistance to the work, but also this idea of I'm wasting all this time. And there's sort of an urgency anger that can come up at things too. And so how do you make space for your clients to feel their anger? Often it sounds like the clients you have are people that, like you said, they've been sort of taught that their feelings don't matter. And this is a really intense emotion that is both empowering and disempowering depending on how it's experienced. And so how do you bring that in a way that allows people to connect to it and to experience their anger in an open way?
Yeah. So I think it's really imperative to view anger. Again, anger can be misplaced or, we can be irresponsible with it. But in its essence, anger is like a light on the dashboard of our car saying, hey, check under the hood. Something is off. And our goal with that is to bring to resolution whatever is off. And so that's what anger is. It doesn't mean we have to be violent or explode and say things we regret. It's just a warning. It's a barometer saying something's off. Let's fix it. And so once we can kind of shift and see it as it's not bad, we don't need to have a judgment around it. Of course not. It's there inherently to help us, and we can learn to be responsible with it. So, we start with just going, okay, Bronwyn, you can feel angry right now. Like that is valid. And you can feel it in your body. Where do you feel it? Oh, you feel it in your chest. Okay, let's just feel it. Let's just feel it and go, okay, I'm mad because this person said they do this and they are not. That's okay. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be anxious or depressed, or we're going to have some other symptom from disassociating from that anger, because it is there. Whether we acknowledge it or not, it is there. And I guess that kind of applies to the whole concept of what we're talking about today is our core self is there. And if we don't relate well to her, it doesn't mean she's not there. We can't just close our eyes and pretend we don't feel anger or pretend we don't have a core self. Then we're doing our own neglect, and we will pay for it. We absolutely will pay for that. So, so just rule number one is just start with, it's okay to feel this. And why am I feeling this? Like, I'm going to look under the hood. What is this about? Oh, it's because this is the 8th time this pattern has shown up with this person. So what do I need? Our feelings tell us what our needs are. What do I need? I need to finally have a conversation with this person and say, hey, this is like a repeating pattern. And I kind of dismissed it at the beginning, but it keeps happening. Like, what is this all about? So that's being assertive, or it could be a boundary. We don't need to continue that relationship. We can have a boundary, or it could be accountability. If we can't do those other things, maybe at work, it would be more like an accountability issue, but that's how we're responsible for our anger. And the more we do that, the more we integrate, because our anger is kind of one and the same with our inner child. The more we heed it, the more we attune to it, the more we do right by ourselves, the more we integrate with ourselves, with our inner child. So it all kind of just goes together in this beautiful cycle.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like there's this theme in where we've gone. And as we are coming to a close, I'm thinking about kind of how the process, we were talking a bit offline about how this isn't a one and done. People you don't just heal. You don't read one book or do one bout of therapy and everything's done, because it's not fixing what's broken. It's learning to live an integrated life that allows you to stay in alignment with your true self. And, I kind of pictured when you talked about we're born with this potential and then the shifts that can kind of kick us off. I think about being a marble sort of rolling in sand and then something knocking me in a different path. And
Yeah.
we're going to get knocked again. And there's going to
Yes.
be new pieces of it. And so it really, as I'm hearing you, I'm coming back to this idea of insight and action. And it sounds like a big thing you're talking about is this ability to name and to validate our feelings, our experiences, our selves, our past self, our present self, and to give space to that so we can actually come to and connect with our physical and emotional self on a deeper level. And then going back to what you said, recognizing that beyond just validating and allowing those feelings to exist, recognizing that our feelings tell us our needs. And so then going into that and saying, what is this anger telling me? What do I need based on this? And maybe I need nothing. I just needed to validate it that I was angry when I was 6 about this thing that happened. And now I feel at peace with it. I don't like that it happened, but I am in a place now where I'm practicing radical acceptance. I can't control that it can happen or that it did happen, but I can control how I relate to it now because I gave myself that experience. Or like you said, it's integrating and coming up with that intentional action and next step, whether that's with ourselves, with other people. And so, really you're describing this kind of ease. Like I think about like an oiled path. It's still not like I don't like the path sometimes. I don't want to do the work sometimes, but it feels like I can make sense of the connections and I'm able to figure out how to get from one place to another because again, I'm in alignment with all these different parts of myself ultimately. And so, okay, I'm curious about for you because you talked about, this is a recent transition for you as well. And as you've done your work, you've been able to really consider how much more depth you can create with the clients that you work with. And so I want you to imagine you're listening to this in a year and you've had your next marble kick and you've been invited back into a place of pain or an invitation to distract away from that core self. What do you want to tell yourself in that moment to get back in that place of integration and to come back to that place of healing and forgiveness?
Yeah, I think what is truly healing and therapeutic is understanding. So when you describe like that marble being kicked, let's take time to reflect, like, what the hell was that? Like, what happened? Let's look at why did that person do that? And how did we play a role? Were we just blind? Were we blindsided? Were we intentionally blind? What was their intentionality? How did that ricochet? Understand. And that takes reflection. I'm not a big fan of meditation, but I love reflection. So just sitting there and going, what the hell was that? Why did I react like that? What the hell happened within me? Whatever. And reflecting on ourselves, reflecting on and kind of noticing the pattern, understanding the dynamic. That's strategic. And then we start seeing the same patterns. We start seeing the same things happening and we start to just become savvy. And so the more we understand ourselves, that is the healing there. And so I see those marbles being kicked or the marble being kicked. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it might send us into a tailspin, but it's also a beautiful opportunity to understand ourselves more, to understand and to rise up even more. It's like you can't get new muscles without doing the hard work of exercise.
Right.
So it's just another opportunity to build new muscles, to know ourselves more, to be true to ourselves once again.
I love that. Okay, so I'm thinking now about all the listeners that are like, all right, I feel invited in this journey. I don't love this journey. I'm still a little hesitant. And I'm recognizing that the goal isn't to feel ready, it's to just decide and to do some of the work. And you mentioned you have a podcast, which seems like a really accessible way for people to get to know you more and to begin some of this work. I also know that you do work with people in a more intensive way. And so for some people, they're really going to be like, yeah, great. I'm already subscribed to the podcast. I did that midway through, but I want something more than that. And so can you tell listeners how they can find you, where your podcast is, how they can work with you one-on-one, any other ways that they could reach out to you, just knowing that we don't have to do this alone. And if, again, connecting with you feels like the right place so that they can remove one more barrier and make it even more accessible, grease that wheel a little bit more and make it a little easier to take that next step.
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast is called Angry at the Right Things, and it is found wherever you subscribe to your podcast. And yeah, my goal really is to, get this out there and, maybe bypass therapy altogether would be awesome. In my whole journey, I actually never found a good enough therapist for myself. And I've been to a good dozen over my lifetime. And I kind of became my own therapist. And these are things I learned on my own. So that's kind of why I'm doing this podcast, is for other people to do it for themselves. I think that's even more empowering. I think a good therapist is awesome, but I think they're few and far between, unfortunately, really good ones. As far as me, I do take clients in the state of California. I don't think I'm allowed to take them outside the state of California, but you can find me. I'm on Facebook, just Bronwyn Schweigerdt, and LinkedIn and YouTube.
Awesome. So listeners, we will have links down in the show notes for you. I think the most accessible place, obviously you already listen to podcasts or you wouldn't be listening to this one. So it's a nice, easy jump over. I think some of the exercises and the ways that you communicate with people, even you modeling how to talk to your inner child, there's such a beauty in having somebody do that with you and for you to help. Because I think a lot of us get in our own head. We're anxious about how to do it, quote unquote, right, and what the next step is. And so sometimes someone just breaking it down for you is so key. And so I think your podcast is such an accessible way for people to begin to do this work and also to kind of cultivate a little bit more curiosity rather than, again, keep chasing that, well, what's the next step? So I should feel a little better. And so again, listeners, I'm going to have all of that in the show notes. Remember that these episodes are available to you all the time. So it isn't a one and done, even listening to this episode. Come back to it at different points in your process. I know that what I was able to get out of this now is different than what I would have gotten 6 months ago in my healing journey. And is probably going to look different in a year when I revisit this. And so being kind to yourself and saying, what's my one thing I'm going to take today? And then coming back to it when you're ready for another layer. And as always, let us know in the comments what comes up for you. If there's ways that we can continue to support you, please share this episode with someone else you think could benefit from hearing it. And if you want to stay in the know on any new podcast episodes when they come out, feel free to click that subscribe button and leave us a review. Otherwise, we will see you back here next Sunday.